Thank you very much. Thank you very much. It's very nice to be here, to be able to contribute something. So my talk today is based on that article in that book, and you cannot get that book because it's published in Tokyo by the Jodo Shinshu Press in Tokyo. So the Jodo sect, unlike the Jodo Shinshu sect, well, actually Jodo Shinshu is divided into various branches and factions, but there's a lot more cooperation than Jodo sect. In Jodo, actually, the Tokyo center is Zojoji Temple, the Kyoto center is Chioin, and they don't do much together. And so anyway, the publisher is in Tokyo, this tiny little place at Zojoji. And if you don't contact them, you can never get any of the things they publish, which is bananas. But anyway, I want to also mention that my talk about Nenbutsu today, you're going to see the word spelled differently than the Jodo Shinshu spelling in BCA, which is with N-E-M. I always spell it N-E-N, not N-E-M. And the reason for that is because the first word, nen, if you separate the nem and the butsu, okay, you really need to do that to understand Nenbutsu culture. So I'm actually writing a book about Nenbutsu. And when you separate the two, the spelling N-E-M doesn't work. It's never spelled that way. It's N-E-N, okay? And there's hundreds and hundreds of words with N-E-N, and many words ending in the nen of Nenbutsu. So I always spell it that way, even though when you actually say it, the N turns into an M because it comes before the B. So this is sort of an ongoing issue. I'm not going to argue for this, what you guys are going to do, because you're in the context of the BCA, so you can spell it with an Nenbutsu with an M, but I just want you to understand that that's what you're going to see. You're always going to see the N-E-N spelling. If you can see that slide, you'll see that these are the 4 questions, and I'm basically going to just go through the slides and read most of what's on here. We can talk about it later, and I'll improvise a little bit, of course. But how do we prepare for death? That's really what this is about. And the key question here is that, and this is something that's really quite striking, and I always mention this in my undergraduate Buddhism classes also, is that one of the differences between Buddhist culture and Western culture is how to think about death. And what I mean by that is death in America, death in Europe is always unexpected passive thing. It just hits you in the head like a branch falling off a tree, right? Oh my God, I know it will happen, and how many months do I have left, this kind of thing. But other than that, we don't really prepare for it psychologically, except that, well, we think about it, of course, because it's such a big, big, important thing. The end is the end. But in Buddhist cultures, death is something that you practice. You practice how to die. In other words, you prepare for death through years and years of mental preparation. And what is the purpose of that? The purpose of that is so that when death does come, it doesn't catch you by surprise. It's not a branch falling off a tree. It's not a passive experience. Of course, it's passive, but you are involved in it. You observe it. You're not totally on it. In other words, you can control your state of mind at that massively huge, explosive moment. That's what this is about. And in the Buddhist culture, by preparing in that way, the feeling has always been that you will reduce your anxiety, not only before death, but at the moment of death as well. And so it won't be so scary. It won't be so awful because you're prepared for it. Now, does that really help? I can't tell you because I haven't died yet. At least not in this lifetime. When I die, I'll let you know. I'll try to let you know from the other side. This idea that I'm going to let you know from the other side, this goes back to the Heian period in Japan. Genshin formed this group of 25 people, and they all chanted Nenbutsu and did various Pure Land practice together, and they made an agreement that whoever dies, they will communicate to the people left somehow. I'm in the Pure Land. You should know everything's cool. Don't worry about it, Did they really do that? We don't. All right, anyway. So that's a big part of the anxiety about death, is there's just so much unknown, right? It's so much that's unclear. So what I'm going to talk about today is this concept of what I translate here is proper mindset. This term shonen, you can see this on the slide. So this nen is the nen of Nenbutsu, okay? But nen is not just, the word nen has a lot of meanings, and the core meaning in Chinese translations of Buddhist texts from Sanskrit, of course, nen is a Chinese word that existed in Chinese long before Buddhism came to China. The word nen in Chinese are nian in Mandarin pronunciation, but that's not what they spoke when Buddhism came in 2,000 years ago. However it was pronounced, we don't really know, but means recall something, to recall something and then to think about it after you remember it. Like, I remember when my sister threw a pie at me, something like that, right? So that's what Nen was used prior to Buddhism. Then Buddhism comes in, and Nen has two very clear meanings. One meaning of Nen is to focus on something, to keep something in mind. So Nenbutsu, Nianfo, would be mindfulness, concentration on a Buddha. It doesn't have to be Amida, it could be any Buddha, right? And that could involve recitation, that could involve simple focus, okay? And if you do that properly, that's shonen. So if you guys are familiar with Chinese at all, you look at that first character show. Should I stand up or should I not stand up? It's okay? Yeah, so this show in modern Japanese is also pronounced tadashi, correct. The proper way to do something, okay? So there's different ways to have nen. You can have nen that's focused and shall we say, concentrated or meditative, that's show, okay? And you can have nen that's not. So one of the things about Nenbutsu that's really tricky and then becomes an issue for Honen, and therefore everybody after Honen, including Shinran, of course, is that if the Nenbutsu has power, then why do I need to worry about my state of mind when I do it? I just say it. And then it works anyway. Isn't that okay? And Honen said, no, that's not okay, because if your state of mind doesn't matter, then Nenbutsu is a mantra. So you understand about how mantras work? What is a mantra? A mantra is a powerful piece of language that when uttered, right, has to be said out loud, causes some effect. So this goes way, way back in India. It's way before Buddhism. And for example, if you're a farmer and you don't have enough rain on your crops this year and your crops are dying, you do a mantra to make it rain, okay? And the physical world responds, right? You have to know what the language is. So in other words, language has power. That's the presumption here. And mantras are certain phrases. And sutras, Buddhist sutras, I can tell you because I've read a lot of, this is what I do, I read this stuff. They're full of mantras, okay? And some of them linguistically make sense, and some of them make no sense at all. Just baji kadu wa ba ba. Listen, this funeral, I started to tell you in the break about this funeral I was at in Okinawa 2 years ago, and the priest that came to help the family through all stages of the funeral, including the cremation, was a Zen priest. And the family didn't know what sect is Zen, they just knew he was Zen. And at every segment of the funerary service in Clay, he would chant a mantra. Believe this? And when he chanted this mantra, he did not explain what it meant. And everybody said, oh, wow. And so why were they in awe of this? Because he somehow had this confidence that when I say, that will have an impact, and the people go, we don't know, So he's a priest, he's wearing his robes, he's saying this loudly with confidence, so therefore, wow, this is really making an impact. And I thought, boy, what happened to Zen Buddhism in Japan? Anyway, you could see the appeal of mantra belief, okay? And if this gives you a sense of comfort, then yeah, I'll take it, my mother just died, I'm in bed, et cetera, et cetera. That makes perfect sense. I'm just saying that when Honen was pushing this notion that Nenbutsu is different from other practices, And when Shinran heard this, she really had an awakening, was so happy. Honen was saying, you have to understand, this is not a mantra. This is not something that works just by the sound. Because if it is, then what the hell are we doing? We just say any mantra, right? Honen's idea is that this is something specifically tied to Amida Buddha. That Amida Buddha selected this, chose this, and told us this is what you should do. This is the phrase, because when you say this out loud, I hear you. Okay, I respond to you. In other words, this is a way to connect with the Buddha. This is a way to invoke the presence of the Buddha in the world. And so Honen said, your state of mind matters. Okay. Now, Honen didn't invent this. Again, goes back to the shonen idea that had been there before. But there was a downside to it also that Honen was trying, not to his own teaching, but to the shonen idea, and that's what I'm going to talk about. Okay, what else we got here? All right. So shonen was very popular, and shonen in the context of funerals, or dying, not funerals, but dying, was that you needed to have a proper shonen at the moment of death. And that your practice will help you prepare for this. And then when death comes, you don't just go, you are reciting the Nenbutsu or thinking of the Buddha. You know what I'm saying? You're doing something that focuses on the Buddha. And that helps you get through this difficult moment. And Honen wanted to get rid of that. And I'll talk about why, okay? And finally, I want to talk a little bit about the fact that when we look at the art from this time, and we look at the discussions about how people died in Honen and after Honen, and in the biographical material written in the 13th century, we see that death was not a personal. We think of death as a very lonely experience. But what you'll see from these pictures is that it was not a lonely experience at that time. So this is another one of the themes that I want to talk about, is the shift from thinking about how to deal with somebody after they die, which is what a lot of Buddhist priests do today, because we talk about funerary Buddhism and all that. But that's a fairly modern development. At that time, the focus was on how to help people at the moment of death, not after they died, okay? Buddhism didn't really do funerals in Honen and Shinran's time. Instead, they focus on helping people prepare for death and then die, right? So that's a shift too. Okay, I'm talking too much. Let's see if we can get through. Okay, so never mind the Chinese. Life and death and life. Okay, so when Buddhism came to East Asia, it had a lot to say about death as much as it did about life. And in the contrast to pre-Buddhist culture, and this is true in India, and this is true in China, and this is true in Japan as well, Buddhism always interacts with pre-Buddhist culture in a way that ends up with a kind of fusion, right? And as Buddhism interacted with pre-Buddhist Chinese cultures, then when Buddhism comes to Japan, how does it come to Japan? It doesn't come to Japan from India. It comes to Japan from China. So you're getting that mixture already, right? To what degree do the Japanese pick up on Chinese notions of death? And to what degree do they not? Because they have their own tradition about death, right? So this is connected to family, village, clan, language, etc., okay. Even though, so we talk about Buddhism in kind of as a transcendent, universal teaching, and of course it is, but at the same time, down on here on the ground, the way it actually functions, it's always got to function in a particular context, just like Jodo Shinshu in Japan or Jodo Shinshu in America. It's the same kind of thing. Okay. So one of the things that's really striking about the movement of Buddhism into Asia is the fact that Buddhists were involved in medicine and healing. In fact, the monastic precepts forbid Buddhist monks from being involved in anything to do with the healing arts. It's forbidden. Just like a Buddhist monk cannot listen to music, cannot go to watch a play, you cannot get involved in healing people. That's not what a monk does. Your job is to attain awakening and guide others toward their awakening. Your job is not to heal them. You're not a doctor, okay? You're not a physician. You're not a performer. You're not et cetera, et cetera. That's the way the monastic precepts are conceived of in India. That's why Buddhist monks in India could not grow their own food. Most people don't know this, but you're not allowed to farm for food. You beg for food. Why do you not farm? Because that means you get involved, invested in how am I cultivating the ground properly, putting in the fertilizer, getting the seeds and the rain and all that stuff again. Again, that's not your job. Your job is a professional monastic. Your job is to train your mind to attain awakening. And by doing that, you guide others to attain awakening. You become an example. You have the mental experience that helps them. That's what you're supposed to do. However, that's again, the paradox is that's the way the scriptures are written. But when the Buddhist monks came to China, they had a lot of knowledge of Ayurvedic medicine, right? This is Indian folk healing traditions. And they used it themselves in their own community. And when the Chinese asked them about, do you know what to do about this? The monks said, oh yeah, you give them this thing, get that herb, we boil it and make some tea and then that works. So the Chinese are really impressed with this. So in fact, my own theory is that one of the reasons Buddhism succeeded in China immediately was this medicinal knowledge. And there's a lot of stories, about people gaining from the medicinal knowledge and medicinal practices that the monks had. Okay, people would go to the temple when they got sick, right? Which is not the way it's supposed to be. All right. In Japan as well, there is this record of Shotoku Taishi's father getting sick, and the Buddhist monks in Japan are called in to try to heal him, okay? So this shows, even from the very beginning, Buddhist monks in Japan are involved in healing. So I'm saying to you that, again, this is a way in which Buddhism is adapting based on what it knows to the needs of society. How someone prepared for death, how the family responded before and after the death. Again, as I say, these are indigenous cultural practices that don't disappear. One of the things that's really striking today, if you compare what do Buddhist monks in China do, what do Buddhist monks in Japan do, how much are they involved in funerals in Japan, how much are they involved. For example, most Buddhist temples in Japan have a graveyard that they're connected to, often right next door to the temples. Very common. Nobody looks, surprised by that. Buddhist monks in China do not do funerals. They do not have graveyards. Why is that? Because funerals are a family tradition. Care for the dead is a family tradition that predates Buddhism, and Buddhism did not make inroads into that culture. Buddhist monks are not called upon to do that, okay? Therefore, how someone dies in China, how the dead are treated, this is not going to be a Buddhist area of responsibility, whereas in Japan it was very, very early. So again, I'm saying to you, this is another way in which we see that these things are culturally, these pre-Buddhist elements are very strong, and it can have a huge impact. So the other, the more you study this stuff, the more you see how, shall we say, pluralistic, multiple everything is. Karma. What is karma? How does karma work? My God, karma is such a common thing. Everybody knows about karma. Karma is an American concept, now American word. But in fact, how people understood how karma worked was not unified at all. People have very different notions of karma. Karma was around before the Buddha, and we can know when it first starts to appear in Indian literature. It's about 200 years before the Buddha. By the time the Buddha is born and it comes into the world, everybody's talking about karma. And one of the things about, the reason I mention this is that one of the striking features of Indian notions of karma that we cannot explain is that people very much believe that what you do at the last moments of your life have a different karmic impact than what you do at other moments of your life. In other words, you do good deeds, you build up karmic merit. You do bad deeds, you have bad karma, and that affects you in this life and in your future lifetimes. But what you do on the last day of your life, what you do in the last hour of your life, for many people, it had 100 times more impact. Now, where does this come from? We have no idea. Another thing I'll tell you that's also, it's not in the slides, but you guys all know about the 49-day thing? Yeah? Where does that come from? The Buddha never mentions 49 days about rebirth. That's something that develops in Buddhism as it grows up in India. Well, we have 7 days in the week. You got 7 weeks to get reborn somewhere, you know? That's, again, popular culture's reaction to the Buddhist teaching, and they added that. So that someone is reborn within 49 days. Now, of course, the 49-day theory, I call it a theory because we don't know where it comes from, is, and there's no way to substantiate that, but that was really widespread, continues to be very widespread. You see this in China, Korea, Japan, the Buddhists talk about this all the time. Well, that has problems too, because if the person is reborn within 49 days, then why do a funerary service after that? They've already been reborn somewhere. They're not the same person. There's no reason to a funerary service a year later. They're gone. That person is evaporated, okay? So, now their consciousness may be in someone else, but they have a different person with a different name, with a different family, and who knows? They could be in heaven. They could be, born in Orange County. They could be anywhere. You know what I'm saying? I'm just saying that these things don't always fit together, and yet we do services, we do funerary services on a repeated basis over and over and over again, because often these things are for the living, they're not for the dead so much. But the pretense is that they're going to help the person who has died. I'm just saying that, etc. And if the person's reborn in the Pure Land, if you really believe that, then what do you need a funeral service anyway? You don't. It's already taken care of, right? So again, these things, there are multiple layers of activities going on. To me, this doesn't discount this stuff because it's, you might say it's logically inconsistent. This is the way religion always works. Just like politics, our current political situation is bizarre. People have different views of things, and they continue in their way. This is the world we live in, and this is who we are. So I'm not criticizing it at all. I'm just saying that what matters in my talk today is this notion that what happens at the very last moments of your life have greater karmic impact. Okay. So this means that you can the belief was that you can actually transcend your karmic situation if at the end of your life you do some certain advanced meditative activity that generates more power, right? That power will be multiplied because it's happening at the end of your life. That's the belief. Okay. So typically that would involve recitation of sacred names. In Hinduism, you recite the names of deities, Indra, all these different people, Chakra, whoever it might be. And in Buddhism, it would be the names of Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, etc. Okay. Right. What about cremation versus burial? Well, cremation was always a norm in India, okay. And why? Because there was a belief in a soul, the Atman. Remember, Buddhism is Anatman, no Atman. But the pre-Buddhist and Hindu belief is in an Atman, and the soul is trapped inside the body. And therefore, when finally the person dies, oh my God, we have a chance to release the soul. Okay, so you burn the body, and the soul is then liberated, is released. Then the deity picks it up, and that's how the soul can get to heaven and be unified with the deity. Okay, so the Buddhists, of course, are not doing that. Burial was a norm in China since at least 500 BCE when Confucianism started. Why? Because your body is a gift from your parents. So when Buddhism comes in and say, yeah, we cremate the dead, the Chinese said, you're out of your mind. You're going to cremate what your parents gave? You're going to burn what your parents gave you? No, not at all. So the Chinese norm is that the body is buried immediately, and then a number of years later, the grave is dug up, and at this point, when the flesh and the skin have worn away, right, have evaporated or whatever they do under the earth, the bones are left, the bones are collected, the bones are cleaned, and the bones are put in a jar. And then that jar is taken and put in another gravesite, which is the family gravesite. So in Chinese gravesites, You have many, many jars of many generations. It's supposed to go back 7, 8 generations if there's enough room. Got it? The richer the family, the more room, the more bodies you got in there. In this way, they're all collected together. And there's a kind of sacred power in this, right? So this is the power of the family transcending the individual. And you, as a child of your parents, you're obligated to serve them in this way, to make sure the bones are collected in that way and joined together with their grandparents, their parents, their ancestors, et cetera, et cetera. And then your children are obligated to do that for you. So this tradition is so deep and so old in China that Buddhism came in and Buddhism was never able to change this, okay? So generally we don't see cremation until now. So what's happened is the Chinese government today, I don't know when this started, about 20, 30 years ago, said there's no room for all these burial sites anymore. We run out of territory. Everybody, so they mandated, it's legally required now to cremate everybody in China. So how they deal with this bone thing, I don't know. But anyway, that's another question. Okay. In any case, the reason that that's important is because it shows how your death is connected to your family identity, okay? And you can understand how the Buddhist teaching is somewhat in opposition to that, right? So the Buddhism doesn't deny the value of the family, but Buddhism talks about you as an individual who gets reincarnated, right, in many lifetimes and many families. The chance of you being reborn in the same family is exceedingly low. So it's presumed that that's not ever going to happen and never happened before. Although the Chinese Buddhists often want to say that it's true. My son, I know, is my great-grandfather. He looks just like him, and he acts just like, et cetera, et cetera. But of course, that's, wish fulfillment. So you can see this is a kind of conflict, right? And the Buddhists generally in China don't talk about this too much because they don't want to get into that, because there's no resolution to this conflict. You have to respect both sides. So these are two, again, just like the 49-day thing, you have to respect both sides. They both go on simultaneously. Okay, now we'll talk about the Japanese, what we know about Japanese pre-Buddhist burial tradition. There's something called mogari. Mogari is not well known, the word is long gone in Japanese. Mogari was a practice whereby when the person dies, they are not buried, they are not cremated, they're placed on top of the ground, okay? And then you get, you wait for that dead person to communicate with the living when they are ready to be buried. Why? Because they have work that's unfinished. Okay? It also means the family can go to the dead person and talk to them. So this tells us that Japan had a very advanced embalming technology. Okay? They embalmed the dead and they were able to maintain their form, okay, on top of the ground. Interesting thing about this is it's when the dead communicates that it's time to be buried, who do they communicate it to? The spirit medium, and the spirit mediums are always women, okay? So this goes back to an earliest time in Japan when most of the kings were female, were women, right? Women were recognized as having greater spiritual sensitivity, greater spiritual power. So they wanted a woman to run the country, and you asked for women, these miko, they do a kind of ritual dance next to the dead once a week or so. I don't know how often it happened. So, and then at that point the dead says, okay, I'm ready now. And then they communicate that, and then the dead is buried, okay? We also know that at that time when Buddhism first came in, this practice is still going on, and Buddhist monks are also asked to come to the body laying on top of the ground and recite sutras to help the body, help the dead get a better lifetime. Okay. So so Buddhism comes in the 6th century, we get to the middle of the 7th century, we have this big legal sort of a constitution in Japan called the Taika Reform, and the Taika Constitution bans this. It says it's too wasteful, too expensive. Mostly we only know about this happening to people at the upper levels of society, but we have no record of what people at the bottom did, so we don't really know. But in fact, you could see that this practice the political culture in Japan is becoming more and more Sinified, more and more influenced by Chinese norms, right? And so obviously the idea that the body is sitting on top of the ground implies body is nothing to worry about, but the Chinese have this huge fear of corpse pollution, as the Japanese also did to some degree. And so for example, this is another footnote, but in China, if someone in your family died and they were not buried, you could be put in jail. Okay? It was your legal obligation to put the body in the ground, because if you did not, anyone that got near to that dead body would be polluted, and that caused their disruption in their life. So burial was a legal requirement in China. So as Japan becomes more and more like China, this kind of thing becomes unacceptable. And of course, reincarnation in Buddhism also makes this kind of ridiculous. The consciousness has left the body, it's got 49 days, and maybe the body's not ready to be buried yet. What the hell, So that doesn't make any sense. So you can see that the Mogari thing was becoming old, old culture, and they dumped it, right? Yeah. Okay, I got a lot to do. All right, so anyways, we hit the Heian period, and we have this practice of shonen. So again, shonen being getting the proper state of mind at the moment of death. Okay. Let's move on. Shandao, Honen, and Shinran are all very fond of the word sho. This is separate from shonen, just the word sho meaning proper or correct way to do things. You see this in a lot of different compounds. So those are a bunch of two-character Chinese character compounds that are very common in Buddhist writing by all these people. The proper practice, the proper karma, the proper teachings, the proper mindfulness, the proper Nenbutsu, et cetera, et cetera. And Honen uses shonen also, again, in reference to Nenbutsu, how you do Nenbutsu, as I said before. So always includes a presumption of a known ideal and also a consensus that this is the way the community has accepted how something should be done. Now, Heian deathbed practices continued unchanged for most people into the Common period, but Honen was really against it. And for Honen, this is one of his important, might say, goals, was to get rid of this. Why? Because the pressure to have the proper state of mind at death might indeed reduce your anxiety, but it had a downside. What's the downside? You're sick and dying. You're weak. Your brain is all over the place. You're awake, you're asleep, you're going in and out of consciousness. You're supposed to maintain some meditative state of mind at death. That's a lot to ask. In other words, the truth is that most people really had a hard time doing this, okay? And you could see it. And so the anxiety was too much. And so Honen said, look, this is not what we should be doing. This is not what Buddhism is about. It's kind of a mechanistic approach. Just because if you can have the proper state of mind at death, it'll change your karma, it'll increase your chance of being reborn in the Pure Land, that's just ridiculous. Nenbutsu should be done as a result of a transformation, a spiritual transformation that you're fully conscious of, and that should happen when you're healthy, right? That should happen long before death, okay? So for Honen, let's talk about how we take refuge in the Dharma. We take refuge in Amida Buddha. And the Nenbutsu expresses that. And the Nenbutsu means to do that. And therefore, that's all that matters. And if you have done that, then you don't have to worry about your state of mind at death. Your rebirth in the Pure Land is already confirmed. It's already determined, right? So Honen says, let's not do this, okay? All right, so for Shinran, this to me is what Shinjin is all about. The idea that you're going to attain Shinjin at the moment you die, that's a lot to ask, okay? So, there's a lot involved in Shinjin. So this should happen, again, when you can sit around and think about it and discuss it and maybe engage in practice and face the Buddha, et cetera, et cetera. So anyway, as opposed to this, So what Honen is saying is people believe that because if they can maintain that proper state of mind at death, everything they have done prior to that becomes irrelevant, right? That overrides all of that. In other words, you can be a complete asshole, you can do nothing good in your lifetime, you can lie and cheat and whatever, but if you can maintain that state of mind, thinking of the Buddha right at the moment of death, you win, you know? So that was really a horrible approach. Okay. All right. So we have phrases you can see in the literature at this time. Shonen Ojo and Ketsujo Ojo. So shonen, again, is the same shonen I was talking about before. When the psychological state of mind at the moment of death determines your birth in the Pure Land, and Ketsujo, which is when this is determined through religious experience, which is separate from death. Not to say that dying isn't a religious experience as well, but this should happen prior to that. Okay. Another thing you see at this time are these two words, the old model, tanen, and the new model, ichinen. Okay? So again, one tanen means many nens, that is many Nenbutsus, and ichinen means one Nenbutsu. Shinran is very much in the one Nenbutsu category. Shinjin is the experience of a single Nenbutsu moment that is different from all the other ones, right? So that's what Honen is also urging for, right? If you don't understand the Dharma, if you don't have faith, if you don't have Shinjin, then you just chant Nenbutsu as often as possible, you know? And hopefully that will build up enough karmic merit that will get you over the hump so that when you die, you can make it to Pure Land. So again, what you're seeing in Honen and Shinran is this turn away from this kind of, like I say, kind of materialistic almost view of Nenbutsu and other practices. You do them because you know they work, and the more you do them, the more money you make, and the more power you have to focus on content, right? And in terms of content, you don't need Nenbutsu. You just need a moment of awakening, right? And then Nenbutsu is an expression of that, and that can come through Nenbutsu, right? So that's what Honen is pushing. Ryukan is a very interesting figure. Ryukan is another disciple of Honen. He's kind of a senpai, if you know that word, to Shinran. He's older. He's a generation older than Shinran. And Shinran talks about him. Shinran wrote a commentary on one of Ryukan's writings. And Ryukan is in the Tanen category, that he's doing Nenbutsu all the time, every day. And he said it was not intended to build up karmic merit, but to train himself so that he would have a natural inclination to recite Nenbutsu at all times. Therefore, when the moment of death comes, he would be reciting anyway. But I think my reading of Ryukan is he's saying that if you can achieve that, you can achieve a state of mind wherein death occurs inside the Nenbutsu. You got it? The Nenbutsu is the presence of the Buddha in your mind, in your life. And then death occurs at that moment when the Buddha is present. You got that? So this is what I have a name for this somewhere. Anyway, I call this the circle of Nenbutsu, but all right. So now we'll come back to that in a second. Let me just shift. Another interesting piece of this history is that in the past, Buddhist temples had hospices for dying. This goes back to India, okay? And we see them in Japan also. And like in the second paragraph here, is Abbey of Impermanence, Nirvana Hall, the Hall of a Long Life, etc. And when someone died, the bell of the temple is rung 4 times. Got it? Why would they ring the bell of the temple 4 times when somebody dies? So the whole community is aware that this has happened. Got it? In other words, it's not a personal thing. It's a communal thing. The opening line of the tale of the Heike is very, very famous. Okay, the bells of the Gion Shoja ring resounding with the impermanence of all things. This line is cited all the time. This is maybe one of the most famous sentences in all of Japanese literature. Okay, and people always talk about it as a very strong statement about life is impermanent, things change all the time. But in fact, when the bells are ringing at Gion Shoja, they're ringing because somebody died. That's really what that meant at that time. People forgot that because the temple stopped doing that, you know. So this is Gion Jinja. Gion Shrine in Kyoto used to be involved in a lot of Buddhist activities as well. So they did the same thing the Buddhist temples did, was when somebody died, they rang the bell, so the community would know. So I mention this again because I want to take death out of this personalized context and put it into a bigger social context. All right, now I'm going to show you some pictures from the picture scroll biography of Honen. There was a number of biographies of Honen. Honen was, unlike Shinran, Honen was a real celebrity in society. Everybody knew about him. And 5 or 6 biographies are written within 100 years of his death. There's just a huge amount of literature. And one is actually commissioned by the court, the imperial court. And this one, because it's commissioned by the court, they hire the best artists in the country to paint the scenes. So there's 48 fascicles representing the 48 vows of Amida, got it? Okay, and in each scene there's a beautiful painting. This is a national treasure, okay? And if you're lucky, you get a chance to see it only in a museum in Kyoto. But anyway, yeah, but they did reprint it in a book that I was able to buy, 3 volumes, right? Anyway, in paperback, believe it or not. So I want to show you something. So this is the traditional shonen way of dying. In the traditional shonen way of dying, there's always a Buddha image in the room with you. Ideally, always, if possible. So if this person, in this case, the person's sitting up facing the image, but often the person will be lying down. They bring in a statue, or they bring in a painting, they hang it up, so you can focus. Your shonen is easier to do when you got a Buddha image in front of you. Sometimes they would tie a string from your hand or your finger to the finger of the Buddha, right? To reinforce the connection. Here's how Honen's death is depicted in this biography. Now, there's a lot of things to see here. First of all, these lines coming off Honen's face. Over here is Amida, okay? Amida shining his light right into his head, okay? In other words, this is representing the fact that the Buddha is talking to Honen, right? And look at all these people inside who have been observing this, right? They can see the light of the Buddha. But also these people outside pointing at it, okay? This is what's striking. A lot of these images have people outside the room, outside the temple, who come. And you can see some of them are monks, some of them are laymen, okay? And they're all interested. Again, Honen's death is of communal significance. Here are other disciples of Honen. Okay. Now in this case, you can see people are crying. The woman has her kimono sleeves up, covering her face. The monks bring up their sleeves. Seikaku is alone. In this case, is very sad. But the light rays from the Buddha are also there. Okay, you see? So this is an affirmation that the Daigo, the appearance of the Buddha at death, is real. Here's another disciple. It's really striking how in this picture scroll biography there are a lot of scenes of death. And they're always depicted like this. There's always no one dies alone. No one. No matter what the picture is, there's always other people there, okay? Sometimes in the room, sometimes outside, okay? What I love about Japanese art at this time in particular is it's obvious what the picture is about, but there's always somebody like this talking to somebody over here who's not paying attention. This is a spectacular thing about Japanese art. They're like photographs. If you went to some No Kings rally here yesterday and people are chanting, there's always going to be somebody saying, "Hey, look at this on my phone." They're you know this happens, right? They put this in the picture, This is spectacular. This is the realism of Japanese visual tradition. It's really impressive. All right. Anyway. Okay. I love this picture too because the guy's outside and there's a dog here, right? Why did they put the dog in the picture, So again, to make it look realistic.
Did you say these are all in that book you picked up?
Yeah, this is all in that picture scroll biography commissioned by, it's called the Chokuden, commissioned by the court. And they reprinted it, I was really lucky, in 3 volumes, each one about this thick. And it wasn't that expensive, it was about $75 at the time. I doubt you can get it today, except maybe in a used bookstore, but I just happened to be in Japan when it came out, so, all right. Okay, so I'm running out of time. So, Honen's teachings are, in that sense, I think, why the death scenes in this biography of Honen, to show that, in fact, Honen's teachings are relieving the anxiety about death. In other words, to show that these people are dying in a very positive, uplifting way, right? And that people are concerned because someone is dying, but at the same time, they're not, and they're crying because it's sad, but they're not falling apart, right? And also, again, because to show that, in fact, there are always other people there, always other people there. So, in all cases, from this middle paragraph, death is a collective affair. Some of the people participate in these recitations, that is, they're reciting the Nenbutsu as the person's dying. Some of them are just onlookers, okay. Sometimes they're in another room, sometimes they're outside, they come walking up, right? And this is another form of one-minded Nenbutsu. Everyone's of one mind. It's not just the one person, it's the community, right, chanting together, right? So, were they worried about Honen or the dead people dying having the shonen, the proper state of mind in death? We can't tell from the pictures, but we don't know. But in any case, these pictures are the fact that they include so many of them and the fact that the Buddha is always present, to me, suggests that they understand death in a collective way in which the Nenbutsu is recited as death happening with the Buddha present. You got it? And the communal sense of that is very uplifting. So that is in other words, what I'm saying here, I call this the Nenbutsu circle, okay? That the community of people chanting the Nenbutsu together forms a kind of circle around the dead person, and the Buddha is in that circle. The Buddha is in every Nenbutsu that everybody says, got it? And there is the kind of context, right? Just like this room becomes a context of the presence of the Buddha, something like that. So at the saddest day of your whole life, you have the most clear presentation of the presence of the Buddha, right? It's really striking, okay. One wants to die within this circle because it is uplifting and sacred, okay. We often speak of funerals as sacred events, but in this context, dying within the Nenbutsu circle is the sacred event, right? You don't see much in this biography about funerals. What you see are scenes of people dying, okay? That itself tells you a lot. Right. These pictures only show monastics, but we know that in the 13th and 14th century, these abbeys of impermanence, these hospices that were next to temples, which, by the way, we rarely see anymore. There are a few that have been reconstructed in Japan recently, but it's generally, this tradition is long gone, okay? These are also established for lay people, often located near or attached to monasteries. This gave rise later on to cemeteries. This is how Buddhism got involved with funerals, is that they had these hospices set up, and people died there. Temple affiliates or members, monks and lay people, died in those hospices, and then the monks felt they needed to do something in response to that. So then next to the hospice, they would then create a cemetery. That's how the whole cemetery culture began. At the time of Shinran and Honen, temples don't have cemeteries. They're not doing that as a regular thing. Funerary culture connected to Buddhist temples is really an Edo period thing. It's really something that starts in the 16th century in a massive way. And it becomes normative for all the temples at that point. So when we get to the modern period, it's been going on for 400 years. It seems like forever, But in fact, at this time, it's not what's going on, okay? Over time, modernization thus brought a shift from care for the dying to care for the dead. Today, we still have Buddhist monks of course, going to the house of someone facing death. But the community generally comes out for the dead person only after the death has happened. So I'll just tell you my Okinawan story now. So my wife's mother's Okinawa. Her father's American. So I'm in Tokyo every summer for about a month and working at Zojoji. And so we get a call that she's really in bad shape. Her aunt is dying in Okinawa. So we immediately book a flight and fly down there that night. And we get there. The plane doesn't get there until 10 o'clock at night. And I figure it's too late to go to the house, so we'll go early the next morning. So we get up and go there early the next morning, and she died that night. So we get to the house, and we open the door, and she's right there in the genkan. In the genkan, So you step up from the genkan into the house, and the first thing you see is this corpse sitting in this box, right? So the house and everybody says, "Come and sit down. I'll give you some tea," it's like. So the dead is with you. It was really powerful, right? And so we pay our respects to her aunt, and we talk to the family, and they explain what's going to happen. We say, okay, and she's still there, of course. And so the next day, or maybe that afternoon, they do the cremation. So we all go to the cremation hall, and I'd been to one cremation before. I went to Kajiyama Sensei's cremation. His wife invited me, but wow. So we get to the cremation hall, and of course, for those of you who don't know how this works in Japan, the body's only cremated to like 80%, 85%, not the whole way, intentionally, because they want some bones to be left over. And so that's when the Zen priest comes out before the cremation, and he recites these mantras and nobody understands, and then he goes and sits down without saying a word beyond that. And we're all going, okay. And then they take the body in. We wait a couple hours, go have a cup of tea. The other one will come out again. And then everybody's invited with the long chopsticks to pick up a little piece of bone and put it in the jar. And in my experience previously, because only the second time I've done this in Japan, was that the first time I did it, everybody who was there, who was invited to pick up the bone, picked up one bone, put it in the jar, and that's it. And then they took the body away, and then they got rid of it. But in Okinawa, every piece of dust has to be cleaned up. So the family keeps coming, and they keep picking up bones, and they get a broom and the dust, and everything is collected, right? It's really something. Okay, then we go to the gravesite, and we all drive to the gravesite, and before anything starts, the Zen priest stands in front, and starts reciting mantras again. Aside. I'm sorry. Before we go to the gravesite, we go to the funerary hall, and in the funerary hall, I don't know about in America, but in Japan, these are, flowers and pictures, it's a big display, and everybody comes up and drops a bit of incense, and, and pays their respects and bows and says a few things. And the urn, the jar of the person's remains are there on the altar in front of the pictures and the Buddha. But in Okinawa, behind the family was another table set up, and that led into this open area outside, and the people from the town came to all pay their respects. And there must have been 150 people who lined up in two long lines. This took it over an hour for all these people to come up and pick up their incense and drop it in the incense burner and speak. This is their way to finally communicate. It just reminded me of this Mogari thing. This is your chance to say goodbye. So everybody who knew her, who wanted to say goodbye, they said goodbye to her. They talked, blah, blah, blah. And they just did what they wanted to do. They said what they wanted to say. They didn't, and of course they bowed to the family as well. It was really striking. And you really had a sense that, again, this person did not die alone. This person died with the community. The whole community is saying goodbye. They're sending the person off. So it was very impressive. Then we go to the gravesite. Then we get the mantras again. And then the jars put inside very much like a Chinese grave with a bunch of jars, right? And that was done. So that was a pretty powerful experience. So I really was stunned and really uplifted by this beautiful sense of community, this beautiful sense in which the experience of dying was embraced and accepted and was just part of life. And this is your chance, just like when someone gets married, you know, and you go to pay your respect and make some, you know, statement about how wonderful this is. And someone dies or a child is born, it's the same kind of thing. It was really quite moving. So, and then final statement about Taiwan. There's a new Buddhist group in Taiwan that believes that if someone in your family is dying and you should all be chanting Nenbutsu together, you need as many people as possible because it's better. So you can call them and they will send volunteers to your house. I don't know if they let you do this in a hospital or not, but they'll send volunteers to your house, even people who have never met the person who is dying. And together you will chant Nenbutsu, okay, as the person dies. So this is a way to have a group setting, to have a larger group, and to, again, feel a sense of community and a sense of together we're going to say goodbye to the person. We're going to, it's like putting them on a boat and sending them down the river. You know, we're going to send them off this way. So this shows that this model is still viable. It's still doable. And so I was just wanted to mention that because it's pretty impressive. Okay, thanks.
Thank you.